Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week.
The order I am about to sign is not the legalization, or it doesn't legalize marijuana in any way, shape, or form, and in no way sanctions its use as a recreational drug. It has nothing to do with that.
History was made last week as President Trump shares a disclaimer before signing that executive order to restart the rescheduling of cannabis.
The facts compel the federal government to recognize that marijuana can be legitimate in terms of medical applications when carefully administered.
Signing this order, Trump was surrounded by his inner circle of medical professionals and friends like Dr. Oz, RFK Jr. from HHS, Nora Volkow from the CDC, and philanthropist billionaire Howard Kessler from the Commonwealth Project. Usually out of the limelight, he's the friend of Trump who produced the Introduction to the Endocannabinoid System video 3 months ago. So now the fate of cannabis is on its way to the DOJ. But having CBD available for seniors on Medicare is a key part of this process.
We're also asking Congress to reconsider its classification of hemp-derived CBD to ensure seniors can access CBD products they have found beneficial for pain.
It truly is a historic day in the fight to end cannabis prohibition, but the federal government's admission to right a wrong policy from the past is a positive thing. We'll hear from NORML, the US Hemp Roundtable, the MPP, and the NCIA for industry reaction. Plus, we talk with AZUCA CEO Kim Sanchez-Real on our last show of the year with our regular state reporters and our international contributors. All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly report on the fight to end cannabis prohibition. I'm Alaina Pinto. This will be our last show of the year, but we will return on the second Monday in January the 12th. But now let's get to the story from Thursday last week. It was a historic day in the fight to end cannabis prohibition when President Donald Trump signed an executive order to enlist his administration to reschedule or reclassify cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. You might remember that it was the disgraced President Richard Nixon who created the Controlled Substances Act in 1970 and put cannabis alongside heroin and LSD. That Schedule 1 class has a handful of drugs listed that have no medicinal value and a tendency to be highly addictive. 55 years later, President Trump righted that wrong.
Young Americans are especially at risk, so unless a drug is recommended by a doctor for medical reasons, just don't do it. At the same time, the facts compel the federal government to recognize that marijuana can be legitimate in terms of medical applications when carefully administered. In some cases, this may include the use as a substitute for addictive and potentially lethal opioid painkillers, and they cause tremendous problems. This can do it in a much lesser way, can make people feel much better that are living through tremendous pain and problems. 40 states and multiple U.S. territories have already recognized the use of medical marijuana. This reclassification order will make it far easier to conduct marijuana-related medical research, allowing us to study benefits, potential dangers, and future treatments. It's going to have a tremendously positive impact, I believe.
In that Thursday news conference, the president was surrounded by leaders in the healthcare industry. Dr. Oz, RFK Jr., Nora Volkow from the CDC, and a billionaire philanthropist named Howard Kessler, who founded the Commonwealth Project. It was the Commonwealth Project who produced a public service announcement describing the endocannabinoid system back on September 29th. President Trump posted that video PSA on his Truth social platform in order for its message to reach the world. When that video was released, Cannabis Coast to Coast News recognized the impact the positive message about cannabis might have on reform. It was impactful enough that it helped reach and pave the way for the most significant announcement in 50 years when it comes to federal cannabis reform. Another huge element of that PSA was its identifying that CBD, a non-intoxicating chemical in the cannabis sativa plant, could really help seniors in our country, especially if they use CBD or cannabidiol. And now it looks like Medicare will be picking up $500 in reimbursement cash for seniors who are on Medicare and want to use the product. President Trump did make one thing perfectly clear in his message. This does not legalize the plant medicine, and it will still be a controlled substance.
I want to emphasize that the order I am about to sign is not the legalization, or it doesn't legalize marijuana in any way, shape, or form, and in no way sanctions its use as a recreational drug. It has nothing to do with that. Just as the prescription painkillers may have legitimate uses, but can also do irreversible damage and never, if you look at some of the damage that can be caused, wreck lives, and if it's abused. It's never safe to use powerful controlled substances in recreational manners, and especially in this case, if you take a look, illegal and unregulated drugs, very, very bad thing. We're also asking Congress to reconsider its classification of hemp-derived CBD to ensure seniors can access CBD products they have found beneficial for pain and other reasons. Some people are literally dying, and they're dying with tremendous pain, and this can, in many cases, literally stop it. And they have their senses about them, as opposed to painkillers, which don't allow that, don't allow them to die with dignity, frankly. I promise to be the president of common sense, and that is exactly what we're doing. This is really something having to do with common sense, and it's something having to do with the fact that so many people that I respect ask me to do. People that are having problems, big problems. They are having big problems with illness, with cancer in particular.
As you might expect, there is mixed reaction in the cannabis industry. Some are calling it the first step toward acceptance and eventual legalization. Others are disappointed that Trump's executive order didn't go far enough. A few months ago, Paul Armentano, the deputy director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, appeared on a Cannabis Coast to Coast News special report. He was able to justify the magnitude of this move that is now a reality.
That to have the federal government recognize that cannabis possesses therapeutic value, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. You know, you and I have been doing this sort of work a long time, and it wasn't that long ago that not only did the federal government not recognize cannabis's therapeutic value, it actually threatened to prosecute physicians who dared to discuss the fact that cannabis had therapeutic value with their patients. So to have the federal government go from that position that was so hostile to this issue to finally recognizing what the majority of the public, and frankly, the majority of doctors and scientists have known for quite some time, that cannabis, in fact, is a legitimate therapeutic agent, I think is a really big deal.
For months now, speculation and rumor has driven news about rescheduling. Now that it's here, many are wondering what's next. What will the regulations look like? The acceptance of CBD should make the hemp industry content for a while, but we will hear from Kerry Hinkle and the US Hemp Roundtable's Jonathan Miller later in the A Block. The first reaction from the industry comes from our friend Morgan Fox, the political director at NORML. Executive producer Jimmy Young talked to Morgan on Friday.
Thanks, Alaina. Yes, this is going to be a very busy time in the world of fighting the prohibition of cannabis, even though last week provided a very historic moment. Joining us now is Morgan Fox, the Director of Government Relations for NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and also a longtime friend of yours truly and this program and the production that I do. And I thank you for carving out what I would expect to be a pretty busy time in your life. Immediate reactions, Morgan. You know, you've been preparing for this, and we've been talking about this. Could it be a couple of years now?
Yeah, we've been expecting this process to be moving forward for a while now. It slowed down significantly when it was determined that some of the folks on the opposing side who were witnesses of at the ALG hearing were actually colluding with DEA, which is wildly against the rules. And so the hearings were suspended in January. Unfortunately, the administrative law judge that was in charge of those hearings retired shortly thereafter, and things have been kind of in limbo since then. President Trump said on multiple occasions that he supported moving cannabis out of Schedule 1 and said some other things. But then, as the months went by, we didn't see any action. And then there was a brief statement during an unrelated press conference in August, and then promising that there would be action within a couple of weeks. Now we're finally getting action. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important to note that this doesn't automatically put cannabis into Schedule 3. It just restarts the process and prioritizes the DOJ and specifically DEA to commence the process as it had already begun. What exactly that looks like, I think, is anybody's guess. And one thing we know for sure is that regardless of how it looks, there are going to be legal challenges which could potentially hold it up for years. And this is like the fifth or sixth time that we've tried to petition to get cannabis moved off of Schedule 1. All those previous attempts have failed. We'll see how this one works out.
Hey, the government is very good at delay, lots of layers. But the significance of this is, to me, and it's already been supported by Paul Armentano, who posted something yesterday on your site, and I read it. And I actually had that same quote in an interview I did with him a few months ago. Take a step back, look at the big picture. This is at least a recognition that the government did something wrong by putting it in Schedule 1 in the first place. It does have medicinal qualities. That, to me, is a big win, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's a validation of what millions of patients and consumers already know, and what thousands of researchers and medical professionals already know. This is a substance that does have medical value, and it does have a lower potential for abuse than substances that are typically in Schedule 1. And honestly, substances that are not even on the schedule, such as alcohol and tobacco. I think even more so, the fact that a Republican president is making public statements about this will hopefully embolden GOP lawmakers in Congress and at the state level, who many of them have privately expressed support for cannabis policy reform, at least at some level, to become more public about it. This provides a little bit of air cover. And at the state level, I think that a lot of lawmakers have said, we're not going to touch this issue until it's off of Schedule 1. Now, even though it's not off of Schedule 1 yet, I think that even this announcement will hopefully embolden some of them to start pursuing sensible cannabis policies and stop trying to just lean on the cover of Schedule 1 to not address the issue in a way that's rooted in science and the experience of the dozens of states that have effectively regulated cannabis.
We'll have the rest of that interview with Morgan Fox on our special report on Monday, December 28th. For now, let's get back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto.
We have more industry reaction for you coming up, including Adam Smith, the executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project, the US Hemp Roundtable, and the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. But right now, let's go to Washington, D.C. and hear from our own Andrew Behringer.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last Thursday afternoon, President Donald Trump signed an executive order to reschedule cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act. Now, the directive moves cannabis from a Schedule 1, reserved for drugs with no accepted medical use, to Schedule 3, marking the federal government's first major policy shift on cannabis in over 50 years. But advocates say the move doesn't go nearly far enough. Now, Trump's executive order represents a historic validation of what tens of millions of Americans and thousands of physicians have known for decades. Cannabis has legitimate medical value. But the fight for comprehensive reform is just beginning. The rescheduling delivers immediate wins. Veterans and patients suffering from chronic conditions gain federal recognition for their treatment choices. State licensed cannabis businesses, long strangled by punitive tax codes, can finally take standard deductions, leveling the playing field with other industries and lowering operating costs. Consumers should see prices drop at legal dispensaries, creating a powerful incentive to abandon the illicit market. Perhaps most significantly, the move reshapes the political landscape. Cannabis is no longer a partisan wedge issue. It's increasingly viewed as common sense policy. The federal government itself has now rejected claims that cannabis poses unique dangers or lacks medical utility, delegitimizing the anti-reform movement's core arguments. But here's the problem. Rescheduling doesn't resolve the fundamental conflict between federal and state law. 24 states have legalized adult use cannabis. Yet products, dispensaries, and consumers in those states remain vulnerable to federal prosecution. Also, rescheduling provides no explicit federal protection and creates no framework for interstate commerce. As a first step, rescheduling represents meaningful progress, shifting the debate and delivering real economic benefits. But as a final solution, it falls short. Complete descheduling remains the only path, aligning federal law with medical science, state sovereignty, and the will of the American people. That's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One more note from Washington, D.C. The last time we checked in and reported on the lawsuit that Canna Provisions and Verano had filed to try to end prohibition with a constitutional challenge ended up with a closed-door session by Supreme Court justices. Well, that door is open now, and it has slammed shut on the plaintiffs. The court refused to hear that challenge, and we haven't heard a comment from Canna Provisions to see if they will try another angle or just this rescheduling decision evolve before they can come up with another legal challenge. The impact of the rescheduling move also had an impact on the hemp community and specifically CBD. While the president and his medical minions at the news conference were excited about the role Medicare will play in the launching of approved CBD for seniors, once again, they showed their knowledge is still limited, and it does justify more research, which will also be possible now. You see, there is something called the entourage effect. That is the combination and interaction of the cannabinoids when THC is part of the final product. The words whole plant CBD was brought up at the news conference, but no one asked if that still existing 0.4% of THC in a package would be allowed in those whole plant products with trace amounts of THC in it. Even if there is a 0.3% THC naturally in the CBD products, it can have an impact on the effectiveness of the cannabinoid. Next up, what impact will this have on the current federal hemp ban in less than 1 year? We have reaction from Bayou City Hemp's Kerry Hinkle in his hemp report, and we will hear from the general counsel of the US Hemp Roundtable, Jonathan Miller. But here's Kerry first.
I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I'm back with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we are reacting to all things rescheduling in the monumental day that was December 18th for the cannabis industry. Of course, in the Oval Office, as President Trump was signing the executive order, he was joined alongside important executives from Dr. Oz, RFK, plenty of folks from the National Institute of Drug Policy, and most notably, I would say in the frame, were two folks on the hemp side in Paige Figi, who is the mother of Charlotte, who kicked off this hemp revolution more than a decade ago, given the benefits that her daughter saw at the time from CBD with THC, given her very rare and heartbreaking medical condition. And so to see Paige up there right next to President Trump was quite a point of pride, just given I know how long she's worked on this issue. And to the right of President Trump was Howard Kessler, a longtime friend and supporter of the president. I believe he's in the Mar-a-Lago golf circles and is a medical marijuana and CBD isolate mostly focused company. He is a primary driver in the Medicare reimbursement push for seniors to be able to get free CBD products. Now, for us in our industry, I think, December 18th was when the executive order was signed. Today is December 19th, and marijuana is still a Schedule 1 drug. So it is a great first step in a long process. We, of course, want the president to be more favorable of this industry than less favorable. So, but right now, this is all just a positive PR spin, I would say. Now, two things of important note in the actual text of the executive order. One is an acknowledgement that CBD products need THC, and the impending hemp ban that Mitch McConnell passed affects full spectrum CBD products. There's clear language in the executive order that speaks to the need for THC in CBD. And then a short paragraph later, there's a directive for Congress to work on amending the McConnell ban and allowing for THC in full spectrum CBD products. So our chance now as an industry is to signal to this Republican-led Congress that President Trump wants THC to be in CBD products, as the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill always was to have THC in these products. And now, when we go to Congress, it's just a debate of how much THC are they going to allow us to have it. We are going to push for at least 5 milligrams per serving as a responsible starting point, and we'll see if Congress bites. But in large part, the executive order, again, a day later, is a lot of celebration, a lot of patting on the back between all sides of this industry. But again, it's just a signaling piece, and more so President Trump putting on a piece of paper to tell other folks in the government, now go make this happen. So we're thankful, we're happy. 6 weeks removed from the ban, to have this type of messaging from the Oval Office is going to do tremendous amount of heavy lifting for our lobbying efforts for folks on Capitol Hill. So that's Bayou City Hemp's perspective. Now we're going to kick it to Jimmy and Jonathan Miller from the US Hemp Roundtable to hear what they think.
Your reaction to when he talked about CBD and whole plant, were you encouraged by that on Thursday?
Oh, I love the discussion about CBD. It's very clear that the president and the folks around him believe very strongly that CBD is a valuable health and wellness tool for so many Americans, particularly seniors. And to have that repeated over and over again was great advertising for our industry.
So are you more confident that something's going to get done now?
Yeah, no, I feel more confident that we're going to be able to reverse this ban before it goes into effect, and that we'll be able to continue to provide hemp products to American consumers. It's not clear what the specifics are going to be, but it certainly was a step in the right direction.
That'll do it for the A block this week, but we still have more industry reaction. We'll hear from Adam Smith, the executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project, next, plus other lobby and trade associations. So don't go away. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
It felt a long time coming, and seeing someone running the federal government acknowledging and pushing the government to officially acknowledge that there's medical benefit in cannabis.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner. $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B block, or second section of our weekly recap in the fight for normalization of the plant medicine. I'm Alaina Pinto. That executive order by President Trump is designed to set in motion the official rescheduling of cannabis. The order itself read as follows, quote, "The Attorney General shall take all necessary steps to complete the rulemaking process related to rescheduling marijuana to Schedule 3 of the CSA in the most expeditious manner in accordance with federal law," unquote. So the next step is in the hands of the Department of Justice, and while no one ever can predict what happens in Washington, D.C., or what doesn't happen for that matter, the hope is that this process will conclude in the first quarter of next year, paving the way for Medicare to start to cover CBD for seniors. Our resident senior is our executive producer, Jimmy Young, and he talks with the executive director of the MPP, or Marijuana Policy Project, Adam Smith.
Thanks, Alaina. Hey, joining us now is the executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project. His name is Adam Smith, and it's the second time I've actually talked to Adam, and I feel like I've known him my whole life. So, Adam, again, thank you so much for joining us, carving out some time. You watched the news conference the other day, and tell me, please, what your initial reaction was to that.
So mixed. My initial reaction was that it felt a long time coming, and seeing someone running the federal government acknowledging and pushing the government to officially acknowledge that there's medical benefit in cannabis. And I think that is, whatever else happens from here, that is a giant step forward.
Right.
And you know, we could all wish it happened one way or the other, or when, but you know, give this president, you know, credit. He is pushing to do a thing that should have been done a long time ago, that acknowledgement. Now, whether what he's pushing them to do in that acknowledgement, going to Schedule 3, is really what we need to happen, that's another question. But just the acknowledgement that we are going to hopefully get a DEA decision that says, yes, there's medical benefit here, the government acknowledges it, is a big deal.
Yeah, and we hope, and that is the biggest picture as you step back and say, it never should have been on Schedule 1 in the first place. When Richard Nixon did it back in 1970, when the Controlled Substances Act started, I've been on record saying many times they should rewrite the whole CSA, because we know so much more about the different drugs and the different categories now. And yet, that means going right in the face of Big Pharma, Adam, and I'm afraid of all that too. And that's where we're at right now, because none of us know what the future is. It's now back in the hands of the DOJ first. How is there an opportunity here for lobbyists, for our Congress to actually say, hey, look, we've got the president on our side now. How can we create a regulatory, deschedule it and regulate it at the same time? Everybody in the industry would love to see that. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is a role here for Congress over the next year, right? Congress can set out laws. If the DEA approves rescheduling to Schedule 3, then the FDA will have a role. And the health agencies will have a role in setting out regulation or requirements. But Congress can take this opportunity to go back and really lay out how we should deal with cannabinoids overall, right? I mean, this is really only just on the medical side, which is vitally important, right? But maybe it's an impetus. I'd like to think although, this Congress, I don't have a lot of faith in this Congress. And as I've mentioned before, hoping for Congress to fix this problem has not been a winning strategy in the last 40 years, ever. But I think that this is, at least we are potentially in new terrain where a Congress, with Republican control, has a little breathing room to maybe be able to consider this and take, the work that they did on hemp and say, look, we can't have this unregulated, and figure out a regulated cannabinoid policy. I'm not holding my breath on that.
We'll have the rest of that interview with Adam Smith, the Executive Director of the Marijuana Policy Project, on our special report coming up Monday, December 28th. That will be heard in its entirety. But for now, let's go back to Alaina Pinto.
Now let's get back to our state reports, where in some states the industry is flourishing, and then there are others where there is a struggle, and that includes the so-called marijuana state of Colorado, which is where Jenny Germano reports from every week.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A growing wellness trend known as Colorado Sober is gaining traction across the state, reflecting a broader shift in how people think about health, balance, and substance use. The term Colorado Sober typically describes individuals who choose to avoid alcohol while still allowing limited or intentional use of cannabis, or in some cases, choosing sobriety altogether, but outside traditional recovery labels. For many, it's less about strict abstinence and more about mindfulness, mental clarity, and long-term well-being. And with that being said, I would like to quote our Colorado's Governor, Jared Polis, and his reaction today on the Trump administration announcing its intent to reschedule cannabis. To be blunt, it is far past time for the federal government to catch up to Colorado and many other states and get rid of the arcane federal policies on cannabis that aren't based in reality and hurt Colorado's small businesses and public safety. I thank the president, and I am pleased that they are finally taking the step to begin the process to reschedule. For years, Colorado has been a national leader in smart and safe cannabis policy that has virtually eliminated illegal markets, ensured safe use, and generated over $1 billion for education. And I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It's now been 2 weeks and a lot of news since the 2025 MJ Biz show in Las Vegas. A number of Oregon operators showed up to network, learn, and participate in industry conversations. Notably, Latinas in Cannabis organized grants for women entrepreneurs. These grants were provided by Salal Credit Union, Dispensify, and Alibi, amongst others. These $500 grants were awarded at MJ Biz and will help jumpstart some amazing businesses. Also, this year was the inaugural Coast to Coast MJ Bowl, hosted by MJ Biz and Buddhist. This year's competition brought together operators from California and New York to highlight the best of each state. Winners were announced at MJ Biz. New York Craft Farm, Lit by the Lake, took home the MJ Bowl trophy for Best Indoor Flower. And Alibi took home first place for a variety pre-roll pack, second place for the infused cherry diesel pre-roll, and the MJ Bowl trophy for Best Overall Pre-roll in New York. What an honor to be included and recognized in the competitive market of New York. I'm Marianne with Alibi for the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One person who is still distraught over President Trump's rescheduling executive order is our Virginia reporter, Joe Parsons. We think he was expecting nothing less than legalization, but when reality sank in, he realized that his state could be moving toward adult use legalization, and that alone has been a big enough battle in Virginia. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 through WV and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. While Health Service Area 1 still sits vacant after Air Wellness backed out of its control, there is major news to report from Health Service Area 4. HSA 4 has been operated by the Cannabis Company, formerly Columbia Care, since the medical market began in 2020. They've been one of the most successful in the Commonwealth. Curaleaf is the largest cannabis retailer on the planet and has now made a deal to control HSA 4 in the Richmond-Chesterfield area for a cool $110 million. This deal includes a vertically integrated medical cannabis license, 5 already up and running dispensaries, and an 82,000 square foot cultivation and production center near Richmond. The deal is going to be closed in the first quarter of 2026, if not before. It should be no question why they chose HSA 4 over Area 1. From an operational standpoint, Area 4 is all set and ready to go into operation, while Area 1 has been stuck in the middle of one operational hurdle after another, from zoning issues to securing retail space. You name it. It's more likely adult use licensees will be operational before a medical operator. Curaleaf's decision to also take control was probably influenced by the fact that Virginia is also on the cusp of allowing retail sales in the Commonwealth. Medical operators will have an advantage in the beginning of the adult use market. That, coupled with the massive size of the Richmond metro area, makes this a more logical choice. I'll keep this story updated as developments continue. Well, that's going to do it from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting from WPCM TV's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. From all of us at WPCM TV, have a happy and safe holiday season. Until next time, I'm Joe Parsons. Stay lifted.
Next up is another new state that is just getting going, Minnesota. But they do have a unique situation up there with Native Americans and indigenous tribes. That state granted another license to a tribe this week, and Tina Tasaka has more in her Nevada and Tribal Nations report.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thank you for allowing me to share my reports with you in 2025. It has been my honor. As 2025 comes to a close, it's the perfect time to reflect on major cannabis developments. I'll summarize Nevada and tribal nations. Across the U.S., tribal cannabis outlets grew significantly this year. By the end of 2025, there's roughly 77 stores or venues owned by 59 tribes, expanding beyond Minnesota and New York into markets like Washington and California. In New York, the Oneida Nation's Varana Collective opened dispensaries in Sherrill and Chittenango in January and Bridgeport in September. In Wisconsin, the Little Pine store from the Lac du Flambeau Band opened in July. Minnesota saw historic moves from the White Earth Nation, launched its first off-reservation adult use dispensary in Moorhead in March, the first of its kind in the U.S., with additional locations planned statewide. The Prairie Island Indian Communities Island Pezi Dispensary celebrated its first anniversary, supported by a 13-acre cultivation and processing facility. The Fond du Lac Band opened near Cloquet, while Red Lake Nation's Native Care is set to add more stores by early 2026. In California, the Sessions by the Bay Dispensary and Lounge opened in April, operated by the Sequan tribe. The Red Falcon Lounge and Dispensary in Indio continued operational from late 2024, and the tribe just announced a new Saboba location in San Jacinto, opening early next year. Here in Nevada, the Las Vegas Paiute tribe, Nuwu Cannabis Marketplace, is expanding beyond retail with a 110,000 square foot cultivation facility, already growing plants as they move into wholesale to secure long-term sustainability. Tribal cannabis participation continues to grow strong, with new dispensaries, lounges, and cultivation operations driving broader market reach and opportunity nationwide. And now, what happens in Nevada with the president signing the executive order rescheduling marijuana? First, we have to wait. Overall, Nevada cannabis businesses and CRBs, cannabis-related businesses, will benefit from the following notables. For state legal cannabis companies, this means easier access to banking and credit, fewer tax restraints on business expenses, and reduced federal enforcement risk for compliant operations. It also opens doors for federally approved research, giving Nevada businesses the chance to develop new products and improved quality standards. Long term, the move could attract more investments, expand wholesale opportunities, and support growth for both tribal and commercial cannabis operations across the state. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Iconic Representation for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I wish you and your family happy holidays and best of health and wealth in 2026.
Next up is New York, where some updated compliance regulations were put into effect this week. There used to be a 2-billboard sign limit in the state, but now the Office of Cannabis Management has shut down any billboard advertising at all. On the marketing side, the OCM has agreed to allow loyalty and rewards programs for stores, plus clarified guides on promotions and discounts. The OCM is allowing exterior signs to be displayed at licensed dispensaries, and stores can also start the distribution of flyers to be given out on dispensary properties. Well, now let's head out west to California to hear what Dina Naguib has for us in the Golden State this week.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. San Francisco Board of Supervisors made a historic decision by eliminating the city's cannabis tax for the next 10 years with a vote of 8-2. While other major cities in the state have responded to decreasing tax revenue by increasing rates, San Francisco recognized that the decline in sales is due to overtaxation and competition from the unregulated hemp and illicit markets. This move demonstrates an understanding that the path to a healthier market requires tax relief. California's market is still in turmoil, but moves like this provide hope to many who need it. In other news, the Cannabis Task Force seized nearly $57 million in illegal cannabis in November. 3 enforcement operations were executed at large-scale illegal cultivation sites in Alameda and Los Angeles counties. All 3 sites also posed environmental risks to the natural landscape of the nearby neighborhoods and risks to people who live there. That's it for California News this week. I'm Dina Naguib with Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Maine is going through what Massachusetts is facing right now with a ballot initiative to shut down the existing adult use market. The Secretary of State approved the rights of the prohibitionists to gather signatures in order to get their ballot question published. Those petitioners need to gather 67,682 signatures to guarantee a question gets on the ballot. So, another example of prohibitionists using the same tactic to undo what the original ballot question set forth. That market is still relatively small, but they've sold approximately $250 million of product this year. There are 4,000 people employed in the state of Maine in their cannabis industry, and if this question passes, home grow rights will also be removed or drastically reduced. Maine passed legalization in the 2016 election by narrowly getting just over 50% of the vote. Next up, Massachusetts.
And I'm so happy to be joined by Chris Faraone, the local Massachusetts beat writer on the cannabis scene. And Chris does a great job of putting out a memo called the Talking Joints Memo. It's a newsletter every week, and I encourage everyone to read it because it always makes me laugh. And this past week was no different. His subject line was brilliant. Orange man turns green. Made me laugh. I opened it up, and now we get to talk with Chris. And I'm not going to end the year in cannabis without talking to my pal, my friend from Massachusetts, Chris Faraone of the Talking Joints Memo. And I'm going to give you credit, Chris, because every time I open up your newsletter, I laugh. Usually it's your subject line. And this past week, okay, in reaction to the dog and pony show that President Trump put together last week for the executive order that he signed to move forward this process that President Joe Biden started in his past administration. Trump's going to take credit for it. But Orange Man turns green. I will never, ever forget that subject line. And of course, I've been sharing it and giving you credit all over. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
No doubt. I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad people did seem to react well to it. I think I can guarantee big news will break if I get a chance to go out every time I go out. I was going to some holiday parties. I sat at a bar in downtown Boston. I look at the television and it's happening, and it's like, I can't get any rest here. So, I came home that night, had a couple. I barely drink. I'm a weed guy. And I had to do quite a bit of work, but thankfully, obviously, I'll get around to what I have to say, and I want some more local experts. But there's obviously right away, the Cannabis Control Commission's reaction, the ACLU, which of course I pay attention to how they keep tabs on these issues. They've been behind a lot of obviously critical cannabis reform in the past. And then, we're going to be looking to NORML and MassCan. But yeah, it is big news. No matter what, it's big news. No matter whether you like Trump, hate Trump, and whether it's real big news, not big news, it's literal big news. It's everywhere.
And right, because people are talking about it. And that alone is a win. And Paul Armentano from NORML, the deputy director, great soundbite. It's going to be in our Cannabis Coast to Coast news this week, where he basically said, this is a big deal because finally the government is recognizing they made a mistake with the Controlled Substances Act and with the scheduling of cannabis at Schedule 1. Where it goes from here is anybody's guess, because it goes right back into the political machine now. It isn't descheduled. It's just that the president wants it descheduled. And now it's up to his lieutenants to get it done. And that includes Pam Bondi, the attorney general, and even Terrence Cole from the DEA. So we're just starting that process, but I love the fact that there's actually a local connection. Howard Kessler from the Commonwealth Project. I think if you dug into his background, you'll be impressed. He's a very quiet, reserved man who doesn't like the spotlight, but he was there and he talked to President Trump, and you could tell that they had a personal relationship.
You know what? I mean, I gotta say, I'm gonna pull the hipster card here, which is like, it's always aggravating when, somebody's 30 years late to the party. I never have any respect for the person who, I'm so glad in the cannabis industry that we're now 5 years at least past personal stories about how someone's mother got healed. Because it's also, who cares? Yeah, that's the most so you didn't care when the rest of us were clamoring for years when other people needed help? When your aunt got cancer. Now you care? I have had it with that. It makes me literally nauseous. So if it works on Trump, if it works at the highest levels, but these aren't smart people. They just happen to run the planet. So it's like, I get whatever. I'll take what it takes. I'll take it, whatever it takes. But I'm not awfully impressed. It's like Reagan, discovering AIDS through only caring about AIDS after his homie Rock Hudson was diagnosed, right?
Whatever it takes, Chris. Whatever
it takes, I guess.
Since we won't have a Cannabis Coast to Coast news for you for 2 weeks, January 12th being the next one, we will be releasing all of these interviews in their entirety on Monday, December 28th.
That'll do it for the B Block, or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast news, but we have more industry reaction on the news about rescheduling cannabis that happened last Thursday. Executive producer Jimmy Young is talking with the NCIA's political director, Michelle Rutter Friberg. So, did development with rescheduling make her job any easier? Cannabis Coast to Coast news is back after this.
What I think the president's executive order did, or one of the things that it did in terms of looking at it through a political lens, is it certainly provided cover to members of the Republican Party who have perhaps been more reticent or reluctant to be supportive of this issue. So
it's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore, so I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now, if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegits filtration system. What? The Weegits.com, Weegits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems. Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weegits filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the C Block, our final section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News show. We usually do our international cannabis news segments in the B Block.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So we have in Canada this week is Alberta has now uplifted some of their regulations when it comes to promoting and branding and sponsorships and just in the whole realm of advertising. This is something that's going to be great for the cannabis industry in Alberta due to the fact that now in Ontario, we are also kind of in the midsection of that. So it's only going to be now on par with us. Next one we have is JC Green, which is a company that produces the brand Johnny, has recalled pretty much their whole line off the market due to a fire that happened in 2024. This isn't something that a customer had actually made a complaint about due to a foul product, but this is something that they had realized and they wanted to take into account for themselves, which is absolutely amazing. Next, what we have is Ontario is introducing a pilot project, which is going to assist in ensuring that young adults are not obtaining alcohol or cannabis. This is something where they are going to be implementing a $100,000 fine to any company or store that is doing this. But this is also going to be something where they're going to be hopefully finding a way to not only regulate, but also ensure that there are no slips within the cracks, or I should say slips within the pipes, for them to be able to be seeping through and not necessarily having a foundation which is going to be safe. So for Canada, this is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis Report. Peace.
In Arizona, it's a similar story in many states. Falling prices, acquisitions, and closings. A sad chapter in a vibrant market that was the first to offer retail licenses to all licensed medical dispensaries when adult use started. Here's Karen Black with an update.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
A recent study shows that Arizonans living near licensed cannabis dispensaries are significantly less likely to engage in binge drinking, suggesting the availability of cannabis may offer a harm reduction alternative to alcohol in communities across the state. In product news, Green Dot Labs is launching an exclusive new house-bred strain called Safety Meeting on December 27 at select dispensaries statewide. As we look back at 2025, Arizona's cannabis industry faced unprecedented challenges, from regulatory upheaval to structural market collapse and major operators buckling under financial pressure. The hemp fight defined much of the year. In March, Attorney General Chris Mays demanded hemp-derived THC products be pulled from gas stations and smoke shops. In June, a judge sided with Mays, ruling that all THC products, hemp and cannabis, must be sold through licensed dispensaries. The Hemp Industry Trade Association appealed, and that case is still pending, now in the context of the federal hemp ban. And the state's cannabis testing system also came under fire. Labs were fined over $1 million for contamination failures and inaccurate potency measurements, but regulators refused to disclose which labs were penalized or why, leaving consumers in the dark about supply chain integrity. Meanwhile, Arizona's medical marijuana program essentially collapsed. Patients abandoned registrations in droves, with medical sales plummeting more than 26% as consumers shifted to cheaper adult use purchases. Overall cannabis sales dropped roughly 18% year over year, forcing operators to slash prices and fight for market share in an increasingly brutal environment. And some companies didn't survive the downturn. The Cannabis Coast sold its Arizona operations to Faraone for $15 million. Scottsdale-based Tilt Holdings filed for creditor protection and was delisted from public markets after losing tens of millions of dollars. And Forefront Ventures collapsed entirely, filing for receivership in June under the weight of $59 million in debt. 2025 was a year of reckoning for Arizona cannabis, where the euphoria of legalization gave way to the hard realities of mature markets, tighter regulations, and companies that couldn't keep the lights on. As we head into 2026, the industry faces a choice: adapt, consolidate, or disappear. And now there may even be a recriminalization effort. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm the executive producer, Jimmy Young, and I'm really honored to have someone that I've followed in the newsletter world, if you will, the media that is cannabis, the people that cover cannabis, and it's Kim Sanchez Real. She is the principal at AZUCA, and she's based in New Mexico. And Kim, thank you so much for taking some time out. And obviously, the first question I have to ask you is not so much about New Mexico, but about what was your reaction when you heard that the president was finally going to try to start the process of rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the CSA?
Well, I think all of us in the industry are excited to see progress on the policy front, right? So I think that really what the president did is he recatalyzed the process that was started in 2022. President Biden it wasn't an executive order, but it was a directive to begin the process. We got so far, it stalled out, and now President Trump has, which we really appreciate, he has directed the administration through an executive order to expedite the rescheduling process. So I think that obviously I'm really excited about it. I also, as I watch the press and the reactions in the industry, and I see a lot of things on social media that says the president just rescheduled cannabis. And I'm like, no. The president did not just reschedule cannabis. The president just directed the agencies under the Controlled Substances Act to move the process along. So there is still a lot of work to be done on the rulemaking process in Washington. I don't know what you've heard, but I've heard best case 6 to 9 months of rule writing and review. On the administrative side, potential for litigation. So we're still, we're closer, but we're still a long way from this being actually rescheduled to Schedule 3. And then Schedule 3 is certainly not not great policy for cannabis. Is it better than Schedule 1? Absolutely, right? So we're going from policy that never made any sense to a framework for federal policy that makes more sense than it did under Schedule 1, but it's still, in my opinion, not the ideal framework, federal framework for cannabis and hemp policy.
Yeah. And I think anybody who follows this issue in our government knows that both of the past presidents had different ways of doing things, let's just say. Right. Okay. And President Biden tried to do it one way, and now President Trump is trying to do it the other way. It's a style thing more than anything else. And yet, to me, this still rights a wrong in the origin of the Cannabis, the Controlled Substances Act, the CSA in 1970. The fact that Richard Nixon, who drove me crazy as a 12-year-old because I didn't want my older brother to get drafted, okay, and is still haunting me to this day. And because he created the Controlled Substances Act, he had many issues. I don't want to sit here and call names because that's in the past. We can't change that. What we can do is make more sound decisions based on science and research to come up with regulations and rules that are fair to an industry that has emerged from a plant medicine that benefits so many people.
Right. And I'd say even more importantly than being fair to the industry, it's being fair to the human beings who deserve access to this botanical medicinal plant that has so many, molecules that are helpful to human beings. And that's what I'm excited about. And I think that one of the things that really I was very pleased about in the executive order language was that President Trump actually started taking what I call a one plant approach, because it wasn't just, what's termed as marijuana in federal policy. He also brought in hemp. Now, we know it's all the same plant, right? That the distinctions are really anomalies that were created by bad policy. And so I think the combination of the language in the executive order gave me great hope that we are moving towards a one plant framework for smart regulations for all of the molecules, right, that this miraculous botanical medicinal plant brings forth.
Since we won't have a Cannabis Coast to Coast news for you for 2 weeks, January 12th being the next one, we will be releasing all of these interviews in their entirety on Monday, December 28th.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is your Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As always, there's a lot happening in the Great Lakes state. Let's get started. Michigan lawmakers have passed new rules targeting hemp and CBD, and they're already sparking major controversy across the cannabis industry. The legislation sets an extremely low THC limit for CBD products. So low, critics say it's nearly impossible to produce a compliant product without violating the law. Opponents warn this could effectively wipe out the CBD market and harm patients who rely on it for conditions like epilepsy and PTSD. Supporters, largely from the regulated cannabis sector, argue the rules are necessary to shut down the gas station fake weed, eliminate synthetic THC products, and ensure everything is sold is tested, licensed, and regulated. In short, one side sees overreach that could kill the CBD, while the other sees a needed step towards safety and legitimacy. As of December 17th, the bill package has only passed the Michigan Senate. Meanwhile, Michigan's looming cannabis wholesale tax is already sending shockwaves through the industry before it even takes effect. Higher Love Cannabis Company has announced layoffs of 61 employees, nearly 30% of its workforce, across 9 of the Upper Peninsula locations. With the January 1st tax deadline approaching, dispensaries are being pushed into survival mode, cutting jobs in a region where stable employment is already hard to come by. All of this is happening as cannabis prices in Michigan hit record lows. The average ounce dropped below $60 in November, driven by a massive outdoor harvest in October and an already oversaturated market. And across the border, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine says he plans to sign a bill making it illegal for Ohio residents to possess cannabis purchased out of state, including Michigan. Combined with Michigan's new tax, and these changes could discourage cross-border shoppers and put a serious dent in cannabis tourism. That's it for this week. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Last week, Ohio passed SB 56 in their Senate, and they made significant changes to the existing licensees, including cutting back on the total number of plants you can grow at home from 12 per dwelling to 6. They also banned out-of-state cannabis to be transported from another state, and a few more other changes. Christina Brisson and other Ohioans are not exactly thrilled.
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So as expected, Governor Mike DeWine did sign, of course, SB 56. However, he did veto the part about THC drinks. So they were trying to get that to last for another year, and now that's only going to be in that 90-day mark that was already in place for everything else. So as we know, with this bill comes a number of other bad things, where it essentially recriminalizes cannabis. So there is a little bit of hope. So I hope everybody gets out there and tries to join this cause if you're interested, and hopefully you are. The Ohioans for Cannabis Choice are trying to get a referendum in place to stop SB 56. Here's the catch. They got to get 1,000 signatures first initially and then get approved by the Secretary of State. Then following that, they've got to get another 248,000, little more than that, signatures, and then get it all in place before everything goes into effect in March. So if you see them out there, please sign it. Let's try to make that change. And given that we're here at the end of the year, someone recently asked, what is the best and worst that's happened with cannabis here in our state, in the state of Ohio? So I would say we haven't had a lot of big movement legally this year. There's been a lot of battling with this whole House bill and the intoxicating hemp. We've had the introduction of pre-rolls. We've had a lot more dispensaries, and we've had prices come down. And unfortunately, at the close of our year, we've had the worst thing happen, which is the recriminalization of cannabis, which is absolutely not what anyone wanted, not what anyone voted for. So hopefully we're going to see some changes coming in 2026. And that is your Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. President Trump has officially moved to reschedule cannabis, directing federal agencies to fast-track its reclassification under U.S. law. While cannabis is not yet fully legalized, the shift signals a softening in federal policy and opens the door for expanded medical research, regulatory reform, and most importantly for investors is capital access. So what does this mean for the cannabis stocks? First, MSOs stand to benefit the most. Rescheduling could reduce tax burdens like 280E, immediately improving profitability. That's a big deal for companies that have been revenue strong but margin constrained. Second, expect renewed institutional interest. Funds that were previously locked out due to federal restrictions may now begin dipping their toes back into the space. And third, volatility's coming. Short-term hype can cause sharp spikes, as we recently saw all the cannabis stocks soaring. But smart money will focus on balance sheets, cash flow, and market leaders, not just lottery tickets. This is the most bullish federal cannabis headline in years, but winners will be selective. Policy change creates opportunity, but execution creates profits. So trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Next up, another trade association in the cannabis industry that is reacting to the new regulatory world of cannabis is the National Cannabis Industry Association. They will be lobbying now with these new rules that President Trump has initiated with the rescheduling process. Michelle Rutter Friberg is the director of the government relations for that organization, and she talked with our executive producer, Jimmy Young, about the historic move of cannabis off Schedule 1.
Thanks, Alaina. Now joining us is a friend from the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. She's the director of government relations, right? Isn't that it? Or
that is correct.
Right, I got it right. It's Michelle Rutter Friberg, and I so appreciate you joining me. Everybody I'm talking to is coming into these interviews with a smile, because there's a sense of satisfaction for any lobby group or policy group or whatever, because it's the issue of prohibition took a hit this week. I think we could say that, okay? And it wasn't a bong hit, it was a presidential hit, okay? And that being said, we could talk all you want about Republicans versus Democrats. We can talk about the style of President Biden versus the style of President Trump. They're different. We get it. We're in America. One issue is moving forward, okay? This is what I take out of it. And I think back to the fact that years ago, I think it was Paul Armentano from the NORML who said this. Think about it. Doctors used to get chastised or lose their job if they even talked about cannabis to their patients. So look at the progress that we've made. We've got 24 adult use legal states. We've got 40 odd decriminalized states. Michelle, now the work begins for people like you, because now you have to go back into Congress and explain to them what the entourage effect is, all the things that you already know, but they are going to soften. I hope the hardcore prohibitionists will be softened by this move. Do you agree with that?
I don't know about the most, and thank you first off for having me. Of course, Jimmy, always lovely to be with you. There's always people on either side of the spectrum, right? Who you'll, possibly never be able to convince. But what I think the president's executive order did, or one of the things that it did in terms of looking at it through a political lens, is it certainly provided cover to members of the Republican Party who have perhaps been more reticent or reluctant to be supportive of this issue. So, even just I think it was about a day before the president signed the order, maybe even, a couple hours before, I think it was about 22 GOP senators signed a letter to the president saying, don't do this. This is a bad move. You should not move cannabis out of Schedule 1, or, it should remain there, et cetera. But that still leaves, dozens of GOP members who didn't sign on to that. So I think that in and of itself is remarkable. But again, I think it also provided cover to folks like potentially, and, maybe this is me pontificating a little bit as, in my personal opinion, but somebody like Speaker Mike Johnson, who I know for a fact has not been, super supportive of this issue and, hasn't necessarily been quick to advance it. Not that there's been too many opportunities, unfortunately, throughout the committees and, various House of Representatives processes. But regardless, I think that, just to give an example, that the president's executive order and the statements that he made yesterday provided a lot of cover to not only Speaker Johnson, but to a number of folks in his party to sort of step out and give them sort of permission, if you will, on this issue, because we know that the GOP is looking very, very much to the president sort of for not directives. I don't want to, paint them as sheep in any way, but regardless, no one wants to be out of step with the president when they're, part of the same party.
Right.
And finally tonight, while advocates have focused on getting cannabis off Schedule 1, can celebrate a win, the fact is cannabis is still illegal at the federal level. Banks are still apprehensive to do any banking with cannabis companies. And while the relief from the dreaded 280E tax code is a win that will immediately open up margins for all cannabis businesses, this is still the most regulated industry in history. In the meantime, you will see thousands of commercials on alcohol, legal prescription drugs, and now sports gambling, all with disclaimers about using these adult products and activities responsibly. Only time will tell what impact on the future this historic move will have on the industry. But now it's to step back and realize that for 50 years, cannabis has been sitting as a controlled substance with other drugs that are far more addictive and dangerous than weed. So while legalization and descheduling remains the goal for the industry, this is one huge hurdle that needed to change, and now it has. That'll do it for our final news show of 2025. We will be back after our annual 2-week break. From all of us here at WPCM TV and Cannabis Coast to Coast News, have a wonderful, happy, safe holiday and a great new year. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. We encourage you all to consume it responsibly. See you next year.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
the quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com